I found the email from my lawyer as I finished the quarterly performance reviews for my real estate team. Property transfer completed. Divorce papers ready for your signature. A single notification that confirmed my husband had just secretly sold our dream home, the same home where I'd caught him with his mistress 6 months earlier. What he didn't know yet was that I owned the very building where his law firm operated, and I was about to increase his rent by 300%. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The realization of what Robert had done hit me in waves as I read through the attached documents. Our Victorian brownstone in Westmount, the home we'd spent 3 years renovating, where we'd hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where I'd imagined raising our future children, was gone. Sold to fund his new life with Vanessa, his paralegal-turned-mistress. I stared at my computer screen, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, a strange calm settling over me. Unlike 6 months ago, when I'd walked in on them together in our master bedroom and felt my world implode, this betrayal produced no tears, no shock, only cold, clear determination. Let me take you back to that first devastating discovery. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early March. I'd returned home unexpectedly after a client canceled our meeting. My real estate development company had just closed a major commercial acquisition, a multi-million-dollar office complex in downtown Montreal that I'd kept quiet even from Robert. After 12 years specializing in commercial real estate, I'd finally made the transition from broker to developer, and this purchase was my crowning achievement. I wanted to surprise Robert with the news and a bottle of champagne. Instead, I was the one surprised. The sounds from our bedroom were unmistakable. At first, absurdly, I wondered if Robert was watching something inappropriate on his laptop. But his Audi was in the driveway, and there was a woman's coat I didn't recognize draped over the banister. I should have turned around, should have walked out and collected my thoughts. Instead, I climbed the stairs silently, the champagne still, clutched in my hand, and pushed open our bedroom door. Robert didn't notice me at first. He was too engrossed with Vanessa, her legs wrapped around his waist, her red hair spilling across my Egyptian cotton pillowcases. The pillowcases I'd special ordered from a boutique in Paris during our 10th anniversary trip. I stood frozen, watching my husband of 12 years with his 27-year-old paralegal in our marital bed. When Robert finally saw me, his expression shifted from ecstasy to horror in an instant. "Claire," he gasped, scrambling away from Vanessa. "This isn't—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice unnervingly steady. "Don't insult my intelligence by telling me this isn't what it looks like." Vanessa pulled the sheets up to cover herself, her face flushed with something that wasn't quite shame, perhaps just inconvenience at being discovered. I placed the champagne bottle carefully on the dresser. I closed the Westmount Plaza deal. "Today," I said, as if reporting the weather, "I was coming to celebrate with you." Robert reached for his discarded clothes. "Claire, please, we need to talk about this." "Get out," I said, still in that same calm voice that seemed to belong to someone else. "Both of you, you have 30 minutes to pack whatever you need for tonight. Anything you leave behind will be on the front lawn by morning." I turned and walked downstairs, my legs somehow carrying me despite feeling like they might dissolve beneath me. I heard shuffling, murmured arguments, the sound of drawers opening and closing. 23 minutes later, they emerged. Robert with a hastily packed suitcase, Vanessa clutching her purse and wearing a wrinkled blouse. "Claire," Robert tried again, his lawyer's voice slipping into the reasonable tone he used to negotiate. Settlements. We should discuss this rationally. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse. 3 questions, I said, cutting him off as they reached the bottom of the stairs. How long? Robert swallowed. What? How long has this been going? His eyes darted to Vanessa, then back to me. It's not serious, Claire. It's just 8 months, Vanessa interjected, lifting her chin defiantly. Since the firm's summer retreat last July. 8 months. While I was working 60-hour weeks to build my business, while I was still planning our future together, while I was redecorating our home office as a surprise for his birthday in September. Second question, I continued, impressed by my own composure. Is she the only one? Robert's face flushed red. Of course she's the only. This isn't something I make a habit of, Claire. I'm not that kind of man. But something in his expression, a flicker of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, told me everything. There had been others before Vanessa. Perhaps not affairs, perhaps just indiscretions, as he would likely call them, but this wasn't the first time he'd betrayed our vows. Last question, I said. The Budapest conference 3 weeks ago. Were you actually there, or was that a cover? Robert's business trips had become increasingly frequent over the past year. The recent conference in Budapest, a 4-day international law symposium, had been the 3rd trip in 2 months. I was there, he insisted. You can check my receipts, my presentation schedule. He was there, Vanessa confirmed, then added, with a smirk. So was I. The firm sent 3 of us this year. The champagne bottle I'd brought home suddenly looked tempting, not to drink, but to hurl at their heads. Instead, I walked to the front door and held it open. Goodbye, Robert. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. As their car pulled away, I closed the door, sank to the floor, and finally allowed the tears to come. Not gentle crying, but body-racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. 12 years of marriage, a shared life, shared friends, shared dreams, all destroyed in a single afternoon. I allowed myself exactly 1 hour of falling apart. Then I got up, washed my face, and called my oldest friend, Diane, who also happened to be the city's most formidable divorce attorney. Don't communicate with him directly, she advised after I explained the situation. Let him panic. Let him wonder what you're planning. Meanwhile, we'll document everything and prepare a strategy that protects your assets. Assets. The word triggered something in my mind. The Westmount Plaza purchase had been structured through a separate LLC I'd established the previous year. A decision motivated partly by tax advantages and partly by a desire to establish my business identity independent from Robert. He knew I was working on a major acquisition but didn't know the details or that the deal had closed. Diane, I said slowly, Robert doesn't know about my new building purchase yet. It's completely separate from our marital assets. Good, she replied. Let's keep it that way for now. What else does he not know about? I thought about the inheritance from my grandmother that I'd received 3 years earlier, money I'd kept in a separate account that Robert knew existed but had never shown interest in. I thought about the stock portfolio I'd been quietly building, investing the commissions from my largest deals, while Robert assumed I was spending them on the house renovations and my admittedly expensive taste in art. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More than he realizes, I answered. Much more. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of legal meetings, tearful conversations with friends who had to choose sides, and sleepless nights staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, a room I eventually moved out of, unable to sleep where they had been together. Robert made repeated attempts to contact me, calls, texts, emails professing remorse and begging for another chance. I forwarded everything to Diane without responding. He sent flowers to my office with cards promising therapy, promising change, promising everything short of actual accountability. Through mutual friends, I learned he was still seeing Vanessa but presenting it to others as something that had started after our separation, a narrative that painted him as less of a villain. I also discovered he'd moved into a luxury apartment downtown, apparently undeterred by the collapse of his marriage and maintaining his lavish lifestyle. 2 months into our separation, Diane called with concerning news. Claire, Robert's financial disclosures don't add up. His reported income and our knowledge of his spending habits don't align with his available assets. I think he's hiding money. That's not surprising, I said, staring out my office window at the Montreal skyline. Robert has always been clever with finances. What does this mean for us practically? It means we need a forensic accountant, and it means this might get uglier before it's resolved. The forensic accountant Diane recommended, a meticulous woman named Petra with 20,000 years of experience uncovering financial deceptions, took less than 3 weeks to discover Robert's schemes. He's been siphoning money to a shell company registered in Delaware, Petra explained, laying out documents across my dining room table. From there, it moves through several channels before ending up in investment accounts under his brother's name. Classic attempt to hide marital assets. How much? I asked. Based on what I've traced so far, approximately $4 million over the past 3 years. 3 years. The timing wasn't lost on me. Robert had started hiding money around the same time I'd received my inheritance and begun pulling away from the joint management of our finances. Armed with this information, Diane filed motions to freeze the discovered accounts and compel full financial disclosure. Robert's lawyer, Miles Crawford, his former law school roommate and current partner at their firm, responded with aggressive counterfilings, accusing me of similar financial misconduct. It's a scare tactic, Diane assured me. They have nothing because you've done nothing wrong. But be prepared. This indicates they're planning to fight dirty. Fight dirty they did. Anonymous tips were sent to the real estate licensing board questioning my business practices. Mutual friends reported Robert telling people I'd had emotional problems for years and he'd stayed to help me through them. A private investigator was spotted following me, presumably seeking evidence of some misconduct they could leverage. Through it all, I maintained my focus on 2 things: my business and documenting everything for the divorce proceedings. I threw myself into work, finalizing the Westmount Plaza acquisition and beginning renovations to increase the property's value. I maintained a cordial professional demeanor in public, refusing to engage in the mudslinging Robert seemed intent on provoking. 4 months after discovering Robert and Vanessa together, I received a call from my neighbor Margaret. Claire, dear, there are people measuring your house. They say they're from an interior design firm, but they're taking exterior measurements and photographing everything. Is this something you've arranged? I thanked Margaret for the information and immediately called Diane. He can't sell the house without your signature, she assured me. It's marital property purchased during your marriage. Then why would he have people measuring it? Let me make some calls. 2 hours later, Diane called back, her voice tight with controlled anger. Claire, I need you to sit down for this. She explained that through some legal maneuvering involving the power of attorney I'd granted Robert years ago for a period when I was traveling extensively for work, he had managed to create documentation suggesting I had agreed to transfer my interest in our home to him. The paperwork was dated 2 years earlier, but had only recently been filed. It's fraud, Diane said emphatically. We'll fight it, of course. But in the meantime, he's listed the house for sale. Can we stop it? I asked, my hands gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. We can file for an emergency injunction, but given the apparently valid transfer paperwork, it's going to be an uphill battle. That night, I drove past our brownstone, my home, and saw the discreet for sale by appointment sign already installed at the edge of the property. Robert had wasted no time. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. Not just the betrayal of selling our home without my knowledge, but the calculated planning it represented. The emergency injunction was denied. The judge, while sympathetic to my claims of fraudulent documentation, ruled that the property transfer appeared proper on its face and would need to be challenged through regular court proceedings, a process that could take months. Meanwhile, Robert was free to proceed with the sale, and proceed he did. Within 3 weeks, our home, the Victorian brownstone we'd lovingly restored room by room, where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners for both our families, where I'd nursed Robert through pneumonia 2 winters ago, was sold to a wealthy couple relocating from Toronto. I learned this not from Robert or his lawyer, but from my real estate colleagues who had access to the sale records. The final price was $75 million, well below market value for a property of that caliber in Westmount, suggesting Robert had prioritized a quick sale over maximum profit. The loss of my home, coming on the heels of discovering Robert's infidelity, should have broken me. Sometimes I wished it would, that I could collapse into the kind of emotional state that might elicit sympathy or at least release the knot of rage and grief that seemed permanently lodged in my chest. Instead, I found myself becoming more focused, more strategic, and infinitely more determined. He's liquidating assets, Petra the forensic accountant confirmed during our next meeting. The house proceeds have already been partially dispersed, some to pay off the mortgage, some to his hidden accounts, and a significant portion, about $600,000, transferred directly to a new construction project. What construction project? I asked. A lakefront property in the eastern townships. The land was purchased 6 months ago through an LLC registered to a V. Mitchell. Within 6 months, Robert had proposed on the observation deck of the Montreal, presenting me with an Art Deco emerald ring that perfectly reflected my taste. I want to build something significant with you, Claire, he said as he slipped it on my finger. Not just a marriage, but a legacy. At our wedding the following spring, his best man toasted Montreal's newest power couple, and in those early years, the description felt earned. Robert's legal career thrived as he developed a specialty in commercial development law, often providing counsel on the same kinds of projects I was beginning to broker. Our professional lives complemented each other perfectly, our dinner conversations, electric with shared ambitions and industry insights. We purchased our Westmount brownstone in our 3rd year of marriage, a neglected Victorian beauty that most buyers found too daunting to renovate. Where others saw problems, we saw potential. I still remember Robert's expression as we walked through the grand but dilapidated foyer for the first time. "Can you imagine what this could be, Claire?" he asked, his voice reverent as he ran his fingers along the dusty original wainscoting. With your eye for design and my attention to historical detail. We made an offer that day, significantly under asking given the property's condition. When it was accepted, we spent the next 2 years renovating room by room, weekend by weekend. Robert researched period-appropriate fixtures while I coordinated with contractors. We argued over paint colors and hardware finishes, and whether the kitchen island should be marble or soapstone. We compromised. We created. We built. Something beautiful together. The house became our sanctuary, the physical manifestation of our partnership. We hosted legendary dinner parties where Montreal's rising professionals networked over gourmet meals. We converted the third-floor bedroom into a home office with matching desks positioned to catch the morning light. On Sunday mornings, we read the newspaper in the sunroom we'd added off the kitchen, planning our future together over coffee and croissants from the local patisserie. We'll need to convert one of the bedrooms to a nursery eventually, Robert would say, reaching for my hand across the table. Maybe next year, when things settle down at the firm. But next year became a moving target as Robert's career accelerated. He made senior partner by 37, his client roster expanding to include several international corporations establishing North American headquarters in Montreal. His hours grew longer, his business trips more frequent. Meanwhile, my own career was evolving. I'd moved from residential to commercial real estate, developing expertise in office and retail properties. My commissions grew steadily larger, allowing us to accelerate the final phases of our home renovation and begin investing in art, limited edition prints at first, eventually graduating to original works by Quebec artists. In our 8th year of marriage, I made a pivotal career decision. Rather than simply brokering commercial properties, I wanted to develop them. The transition wouldn't be easy. It required additional licensing, substantial capital, and a willingness to take significant financial risks. I expected hesitation from Robert, perhaps even resistance. Instead, he was enthusiastically supportive. "You've got the vision and the connections," he said over dinner the night I broached the subject. "And the timing is perfect. The firm is stable, my name's on the door now, and our personal finances are solid. If you're going to make a big move, this is the time." His support meant everything to me. I spent the next year laying groundwork, forming an LLC, establishing relationships with contractors and architects, studying successful development projects in comparable markets. Robert reviewed contracts, offered legal insights, and never complained when business discussions dominated our increasingly rare date nights. In retrospect, that period of intense career focus created the first significant distance between us, though I didn't recognize it then. I was consumed with building my business, while Robert, well, I thought Robert was equally consumed with his expanding legal practice. Now I wonder if that was when things first began to change, when the long hours at the office became a cover for something else. The irony doesn't escape me that I first met Vanessa at our home. Robert's firm had held their holiday party at our house the previous December, and when he mentioned hiring a new paralegal with exceptional research skills, I didn't connect the I. Name with the young redhead who had complimented my kitchen renovation so enthusiastically. She was present at subsequent social events, firm gatherings, a charity run the partners sponsored, the summer retreat Robert organized at a lakeside resort in the Laurentians. Within 6 months, Robert had proposed on the observation deck of the Montreal, presenting me with an Art Deco emerald ring that perfectly reflected my taste. "I want to build something significant with you, Claire," he said as he slipped it on my finger. Not just a marriage, but a legacy. At our wedding the following spring, his best man toasted Montreal's newest power couple, and in those early years, the description felt earned. Robert's legal career thrived as he developed a specialty in commercial development law, often providing counsel on the same kinds of projects I was beginning to broker. Our professional lives complemented each other perfectly. Our dinner conversations, electric with shared ambitions and industry insights. We purchased our Westmount brownstone in our 3rd year of marriage, a neglected Victorian beauty that most buyers found too daunting to renovate. Where others saw problems, we saw potential. I still remember Robert's expression as we walked through the grand but dilapidated foyer for the first time. "Can you imagine what this could be, Claire?" he asked, his voice reverent as he ran his fingers along the dusty original wainscoting. "With your eye for design and my attention to historical detail." We made an offer that day, significantly under asking given the property's condition. When it was accepted, we spent the next 2 years renovating room by room, weekend by weekend. Robert researched period-appropriate fixtures while I coordinated with contractors. We argued over paint colors and hardware finishes, and whether the kitchen island should be marble or soapstone. We compromised. We created. We built. Something beautiful together. The house became our sanctuary, the physical manifestation of our partnership. We hosted legendary dinner parties where Montreal's rising professionals networked over gourmet meals. We converted the 3rd-floor bedroom into a home office with matching desks positioned to catch the morning light. On Sunday mornings, we read the newspaper in the sunroom we'd added off the kitchen, planning our future together over coffee and croissants from the local patisserie. "We'll need to convert one of the bedrooms to a nursery eventually," Robert would say, reaching for my hand across the table. "Maybe next year, when things settle down at the firm." But next year became a moving target as Robert's career accelerated. He made senior partner by 37, his client roster expanding to include several international corporations establishing North American headquarters in Montreal. His hours grew longer, his business trips more frequent. Meanwhile, my own career was evolving. I'd moved from residential to commercial real estate, developing expertise in office and retail properties. My commissions grew steadily larger, allowing us to accelerate the final phases of our home renovation and begin investing in art, limited edition prints at first, eventually graduating to original works by Quebec artists. In our 8th year of marriage, I made a pivotal career decision. Rather than simply brokering commercial properties, I wanted to develop them. The transition wouldn't be easy. It required additional licensing, substantial capital, and a willingness to take significant financial risks. I expected hesitation from Robert, perhaps even resistance. Instead, he was enthusiastically supportive. "You've got the vision and the connections," he said over dinner the night I broached the subject. "And the timing is perfect. The firm is stable, my name's on the door now, and our personal finances are solid. If you're going to make a big move, this is the time." His support meant everything to me. I spent the next year laying groundwork, forming an LLC, establishing relationships with contractors and architects, studying successful development projects in comparable markets. Robert reviewed contracts, offered legal insights, and never complained when business discussions dominated our increasingly rare date nights. In retrospect, that period of intense career focus created the first significant distance between us, though I didn't recognize it then. I was consumed with building my business, while I thought Robert was equally consumed with his expanding legal practice. Now I wonder if that was when things first began to change, when the long hours at the office became a cover for something else. The irony doesn't escape me that I first met Vanessa at our home. Robert's firm had held their holiday party at our house the previous December, and when he mentioned hiring a new paralegal with exceptional research skills, I didn't connect the name with the young redhead who had complimented my kitchen renovation so enthusiastically. She was present at subsequent social events, firm gatherings, a charity run the partners sponsored, the summer retreat Robert organized at a lakeside resort in the Laurentians. Each time I noticed her professional competence, her quick intelligence, her obvious admiration for Robert. I never once felt threatened. Why would I? Our marriage was solid, our connection both personal and professional. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I believed. Looking back, I can identify subtle shifts. Robert's increasing preoccupation with his physical appearance, a new gym membership he actually used, an updated wardrobe, a suddenly meticulous grooming routine. His growing impatience with our Sunday morning ritual, constantly checking his phone for urgent client matters. The decreasing frequency of physical intimacy, explained away by exhaustion and stress. Signs I might have noticed had I not been so focused on my own professional evolution. By our 11th anniversary, I was actively pursuing my first major development opportunity, the purchase and renovation of an aging office complex in Westmount. The property had been poorly managed for years but occupied a prime location. With strategic upgrades and rebranding, I knew it could become a sought-after business address again. What I didn't share with Robert was the full scope of my vision for the project. Not because I didn't trust his judgment, but because I wanted to prove, perhaps to myself more than to him, that I could execute a complex development strategy independently. I mentioned pursuing a significant commercial opportunity, but kept the details vague. This coincided with my inheritance from my grandmother, a substantial sum that gave me the capital necessary to make a serious play for the Westmount property. Robert knew about the inheritance but seemed uninterested in the specifics, assuming I would simply add it to our joint investments as I had done with previous windfalls. Instead, I established a separate account, creating the financial foundation for Bennett Development, LLC. It wasn't a secretive decision made with divorce in mind. It was a business structure recommended by my financial advisor to establish clear boundaries between personal and business assets. Still, it created the first significant financial separation in our marriage. As I was structuring my business and pursuing the Westmount property, Robert was apparently pursuing Vanessa. The timeline I later pieced together indicated their affair began at the summer retreat, a weekend I had missed due to a critical negotiation meeting. By the time I was finalizing my property acquisition, they had been involved for nearly 8 months. While I was planning our future, Robert was systematically betraying it. The morning after discovering them together in our bedroom, I contacted a locksmith to change the locks on our home. I called our bank to secure our joint accounts, not to drain them but to prevent any impulsive transactions while emotions ran high. I notified our financial advisor that all investment decisions would require dual authorization until further notice. Then I went to the office and proceeded with my day as if my personal life wasn't imploding. I met with contractors about the Westmount Plaza renovation plans. I conducted a property showing for a retail client. I even participated in a conference call with investors, my voice betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. That evening, Diane arrived at my home with takeout, a bottle of exceptional whiskey, and a legal pad already filled with preliminary notes. "You don't have to be so composed," she said as we sat at my kitchen island. Not with me. If I stop, being composed, I might never find my way back, I replied, accepting the glass she offered. And I need to function right now. Diane nodded, understanding perfectly. We'd been friends since university. She knew my capacity for compartmentalization, my need for structure, especially in chaos. Then let's function productively, she said, spreading documents across the counter. First, we document everything about the discovery of the affair. Then we create an inventory of assets. Then we develop a strategic approach that protects you legally, financially, and personally. Over the next 3 hours, we created a comprehensive action plan. Diane would file for divorce on grounds of adultery with all the attendant documentation. I would maintain primary residence in our home while the proceedings advanced. We would request a full accounting of marital assets, including Robert's partnership equity and any offshore holdings. What about the Westmount Plaza acquisition? I asked as we finished our second glass of whiskey. It's nearly complete but not finalized. Is the down payment from your inheritance funds or joint assets? My inheritance entirely. And the purchase is through your LLC, not jointly with Robert? I nodded. Then it remains separate, Diane advised. Don't mention it unless directly questioned during discovery. It's a business transaction initiated with your separate property, executed through a business entity established with your separate property. That night, after Diane left, I received the first of what would become a barrage of messages from Robert. Claire, we need to talk. Please. What happened was inexcusable but not unforgivable. 12 years shouldn't end like this. I didn't respond. Not to that message or the dozens that followed over subsequent days. Not to the elaborate flower arrangements delivered to my office with cards pleading for a conversation. Not to the voicemails alternating between contrition and frustration. Instead, I focused on completing the Westmount Plaza acquisition, a process that concluded 3 weeks after I discovered the affair. The timing proved fortunate. The property was secured through Bennett Development LLC before Robert had any reason to investigate my business activities as part of divorce proceedings. What I didn't know then was that Robert had already begun his own strategic maneuvering. While I was securing my business future, he was actively undermining our shared past, exploiting the power of attorney I had granted him years earlier to create fraudulent property transfer documents. The power of attorney had been a practical decision during a period when I was traveling extensively for work, sometimes internationally for weeks at a time. Robert needed authorization to handle certain financial and property matters in my absence. I had trusted him completely, a trust he was now betraying in the most fundamental way. Robert's plan was coldly efficient. Using the fraudulent transfer documents, he established sole ownership of our Westmount home. Then, through his firm's real estate connections, he quietly listed the property for sale, timing the process to coincide with the initial chaos of our separation when I was less likely to notice unusual activity related to the house. While I was systematically building my case with Diane, documenting the affair and preparing for a methodical divorce process, Robert was liquidating our most significant shared asset. The procedural aspects were handled through a junior partner at his firm, keeping the transaction at arm's length while still maintaining control. The buyers, a surgeon and his investment banker wife relocating from Toronto, were seeking exactly the kind of property we owned. A historically significant home in Montreal's most prestigious neighborhood, impeccably renovated with modern amenities. They were eager enough to overlook the unusual selling circumstances and motivated enough to close quickly. From listing to closing took just under 3 weeks, a remarkably compressed timeline for a property of that value, made possible only by Robert's legal maneuvering and the buyer's eagerness to secure the home before officially beginning their Montreal jobs. When I learned of the sale, not from Robert but from industry colleagues who had noticed the transaction, my initial reaction wasn't grief but a kind of stunned admiration for the audacity of it, the calculated precision, the exploitation of legal technicalities, the timing that maximized his advantage while minimizing my recourse. It was Robert at his most brilliant and most ruthless. "He's using the Taylor maneuver," I told Diane when I called to inform her of the sale. "The what?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. "The Taylor maneuver. It's what his colleagues at the firm call it when Robert finds a seemingly impossible legal solution to a client problem. Something technically within the bounds of the law, but so creative and unexpected that opposing counsel doesn't see it coming until it's too late. Claire, we need to file an emergency motion." "It won't work," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "By the time we get a hearing, the house will be sold and the funds distributed. Robert knows exactly how long these processes take. He's counting on it." "Then what do you want to do?" Diane asked, her tone cautious. I considered the question carefully. The house was already lost. Fighting its sale would drain emotional and financial resources with minimal chance of success. More importantly, it would telegraph my priorities to Robert, giving him insight into what mattered most to me. "Nothing," I finally replied. "We do nothing about the house." "Nothing?" Diane sounded incredulous. "Claire, he's fraudulently transferred and sold your primary residence. That's not something we can ignore in divorce proceedings." "We're not ignoring it," I clarified. "We're choosing not to make it our primary battleground. Robert expects me to fight hardest for the house because of its emotional significance. He's prepared for that fight. Let's focus our energy where he isn't prepared." "And where is that exactly?" I smiled, though Diane couldn't see it through the phone. "His firm's finances, the hidden accounts Petra found, and most importantly, the leverage I have that he doesn't know about yet." The leverage I referred to was, of course, the Westmount Plaza, specifically the fact that Crawford, Taylor and Associates occupied approximately 20% of the building's leasable space. Robert's firm was now, unknowingly, my tenant. Their lease terms, while standardized, included provisions that could be strategically employed under certain circumstances. Over the next week, as the house sale proceeded toward closing, I met with structural engineers, HVAC specialists, security consultants, and landscape architects. Together, we developed comprehensive plans for renovating Westmount Plaza, legitimate improvements that would substantially increase the property's value while also justifying significant rent increases upon lease renewal. The renovations would be executed in phases to minimize disruption to current tenants, with the most intensive work scheduled around Crawford, Taylor and Associates' lease renewal period. The timing wasn't vindictive. It was strategic. If Robert's firm chose not to renew under the new terms, I would have a prime office space available to market when the building's improvements were most visible and impressive. Meanwhile, Petra continued her forensic investigation into Robert's finances, uncovering a pattern of increasingly sophisticated attempts to shield assets. Beyond the Delaware Shell Company and the accounts in his brother's name, she discovered investments in a Panamanian corporation that traced back to Robert through several layers of carefully structured entities. "He's been planning this for at least 2 years," Petra explained during our update meeting. These aren't hasty moves made after your separation. This is long-term financial engineering designed to protect assets in case of divorce. 2 years. The timeline was illuminating. It coincided with my decision to form Bennett Development LLC and pursue commercial property development independently. Had Robert sensed my growing financial autonomy and viewed it as a threat? Or had he already begun his relationship with Vanessa, or someone before her, and started preparing for the eventual dissolution of our marriage? Either possibility painted a disturbing picture of the man I thought I knew intimately. The Robert I married valued partnership, transparency, integrity. He built his legal reputation on being meticulously ethical within an often ethically flexible profession. Yet here was evidence of systematic deception spanning years, executed with the same precision he brought to his most complex legal cases. How much has he hidden in total? I asked Petra. Conservatively, about $2 million, she replied. But there could be more we haven't uncovered yet. These structures are designed to be difficult to penetrate. The amount was substantial, but not surprising given Robert's partnership income over the previous decade. What was surprising was the extent of the planning involved. The multiple jurisdictions, the layered entities, the careful timing of transfers. This wasn't impulsive, it was architectural. As this information came to light, Robert's attempts to communicate with me shifted in tone. The initial barrage of apologetic messages gave way to more measured, legally cautious outreach. He requested a meeting to discuss an equitable distribution of assets through his attorney. He proposed mediation to avoid costly and public litigation. He suggested a settlement framework that, on surface examination, appeared generous, but conveniently excluded the assets he had hidden. The letter to Crawford, Taylor, and Associates regarding their lease terms was prepared with meticulous attention to detail. I reviewed it carefully in my office, appreciating the professional, dispassionate language that disguised the personal satisfaction I felt. The property management company had done an excellent job drafting a document that was both legally sound and strategically powerful. Bennett Development LLC is pleased to announce significant capital improvements to Westmount Plaza beginning next quarter, it began. These improvements reflect our commitment to providing premier office space for distinguished Montreal businesses. The letter went on to detail the planned renovations, security upgrades, HVAC replacement, lobby modernization, addition of a rooftop conference center and garden. All legitimate improvements that would genuinely enhance the building's value and the tenant's experience. All improvements that, according to the lease terms, justified a substantial rent increase upon renewal. The final paragraph addressed the financial implications. As per Section 14(3) of your lease agreement, these improvements warrant a rental adjustment reflecting the enhanced property value and amenities. Upon your lease renewal in 18 months, your rate will increase by 28%, bringing it in line with current market value for Class A office space in Westmount. We value your tenancy and look forward to continuing our relationship in this improved environment. 28%. Significant but not outrageous. Defensible if challenged but substantial enough to impact the firm's operating costs considerably. The perfect opening move in what I anticipated would be a complex negotiation. I signed the letter with my full name and newly minted title, Claire Bennett, President, Bennett Development LLC. Then I placed it in an envelope along with my business card and prepared for a personal delivery that had been months in the making. Crawford, Taylor, and Associates occupied the entire 6th floor of Westmount Plaza, Their reception area designed to impress with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Montreal's skyline, sleek modern furniture, and an imposing marble desk where a polished receptionist guarded access to the partners. I had visited the office many times during my marriage to Robert, attending firm functions, meeting him for lunch, occasionally consulting on real estate matters for the firm's clients. The receptionist recognized me immediately when I stepped off the elevator. "Mrs. Taylor," she greeted me, her expression conveying sympathy poorly disguised as professional courtesy. "What a lovely surprise. Are you here to see Robert? I'm afraid he's in court this morning." "It's Miss Bennett, actually," I corrected with a pleasant smile. "And no, I'm not here to see Robert. I have a business matter to discuss with Gerald Crawford. Is he available?" Her surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly. "Let me check if Mr. Crawford can see you. May I tell him what this is regarding?" "Please inform him that the new owner of Westmount Plaza would like to discuss the firm's lease terms." The ripple of confusion across her face was subtle but unmistakable. She picked up her phone and murmured quietly into it, her eyes darting to me occasionally. After a brief conversation, she gestured toward the waiting area. "Mr. Crawford will be with you shortly. Would you like coffee while you wait?" I declined and took a seat, using the time to observe the office environment. The firm had expanded significantly since my last visit. Additional associate offices had been carved out of what was once a conference room. New artwork, modern, expensive, clearly chosen to impress clients, adorned the walls. Signs of prosperity that aligned with Robert's growing income over the past few years. After 15 minutes, Gerald Crawford emerged from the partner corridor. A commanding presence at 62, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room, he had always treated me with genial condescension, the charming younger wife of his protégé. "Claire," he said, extending his hand. "This is unexpected. What's this about Westmount Plaza?" I stood and shook his hand firmly. "Perhaps we could speak in your office, Gerald. It's a matter that requires some privacy." He led me to his corner office, a space that showcased both wealth and legal gravitas with its antique desk, walls of leather-bound law books, and framed photographs of Gerald with various political figures. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Now, what's this about being the building's owner? I was under the impression Westmount Plaza was purchased by a development company." "Yes," I confirmed, handing him the envelope. "Bennett Development, LLC, my company." Gerald's expression remained carefully neutral as he accepted the envelope. "I see. And you're here about our lease?" "I wanted to deliver this personally, given the long-standing relationship between your firm and my family. It outlines some exciting improvements planned for the building and the resulting adjustments to your lease terms upon renewal." He removed the letter from the envelope and read it slowly, his expression darkening incrementally with each paragraph. When he reached the rental increase notification, his posture stiffened visibly. 28% is substantial, Claire. It reflects the significant capital improvements detailed in the letter. The rooftop conference center alone represents a multi-million-dollar investment. Gerald set the letter down and studied me with new interest. "This is about Robert, isn't it?" I maintained my professional demeanor. "This is about business, Gerald. Bennett Development LLC has acquired a valuable property and is implementing a strategic improvement plan to maximize its potential. Your firm is one of 8 tenants affected by these changes. But you're delivering this news personally, to me, rather than through normal channels. As a courtesy, given our history. I paused, then added, and because I wanted to address another matter while I'm here. I understand my husband has been using firm resources to conceal personal assets during our divorce proceedings. Gerald's face betrayed nothing, but his hand moved almost imperceptibly to straighten his tie, a tell I'd observed during previous negotiations. That's a serious accusation, Claire, and not one I can discuss with you, given attorney-client privilege. Robert isn't your client in our divorce. He's your partner, and the firm's involvement in facilitating financial concealment could constitute ethical violations reportable to the Bar Association. These are matters for the courts to decide, Gerald replied, his tone cooling considerably. If you have concerns about asset disclosure, your attorney should address them through proper legal channels. They have been and will continue to be, I assured him. I'm simply providing the professional courtesy of informing you that Crawford, Taylor & Associates' involvement in these matters has been documented and will be included in upcoming filings if necessary. Gerald leaned back in his chair, reassessing me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Gone was the condescending warmth. In its place was the calculating evaluation of an experienced attorney facing unexpected opposition. What exactly do you want, Claire? Transparency and fairness in my divorce proceedings. Nothing more. I stood to signal the conversation was concluding. And of course, I look forward to continuing our landlord-tenant relationship under the updated terms outlined in that letter. As I turned to leave, Gerald's voice stopped me. Robert doesn't know about this, does he? About your ownership of the building. I looked back over my shoulder. I imagine he'll find out soon enough. Good morning, Gerald. The satisfaction I felt walking out of that office was unlike anything I'd experienced in my professional career. Not because I had blindsided Robert's mentor and partner, but because I had finally stepped fully into my power, both as a businesswoman and as someone reclaiming control over my life after profound betrayal. As anticipated, it took less than 2 hours for Robert to contact me directly, breaking the communication protocol established by our attorneys. His text message was terse. We need to talk, now. I forwarded the message to Diane without responding. To Robert. Her reply was immediate. Don't engage. This is exactly the reaction we want. Let him stew. Later that evening, I received a more formal communication. An email from Robert's divorce attorney requesting an urgent meeting to discuss newly disclosed property interests relevant to the equitable distribution of marital assets. Diane responded on my behalf, indicating we would be happy to discuss all assets at the already scheduled preliminary hearing the following week. For the next 7 days, Robert escalated his attempts to communicate, calls from unknown numbers, a handwritten letter delivered to my apartment building, even an awkward encounter clearly engineered at my favorite cafe where he happened to be having breakfast when I arrived for my regular morning coffee. I maintained my strategic silence, focusing instead on finalizing the renovation plans for Westmount Plaza and preparing for our first court appearance. Each ignored call, each deflected encounter strengthened my resolve. Robert had always controlled the rhythm of our relationship. Now I was setting the tempo. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at the Montreal courthouse. A procedural matter primarily focused on establishing temporary arrangements for finances and property during the divorce process. Diane had prepared me extensively, anticipating that Robert's team would attempt to characterize my purchase of Westmount Plaza as a deliberate concealment of marital assets. I chose my courtroom attire carefully. A charcoal gray suit that conveyed serious professionalism without ostentation. Minimal jewelry except for my grandmother's pearl earrings, a reminder of the inheritance that had funded my business ventures. My hair pulled back in a simple but elegant chignon. The goal was to project composure and quiet confidence. Robert and his attorney arrived moments before the hearing began. He looked uncharacteristically disheveled, his normally impeccable appearance marred by subtle signs of strain. His suit, while expensive, seemed to hang slightly looser on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfectly styled hair showed less attention to detail. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. His expression cycled rapidly through. Multiple emotions: anger, hurt, calculation, and something that might have been remorse. I maintained neutral eye contact for exactly 3 seconds before turning my attention to Diane and our case files, denying him the emotional response he sought. Judge Moreau, a seasoned family court jurist known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for legal gamesmanship, called the hearing to order promptly at 9 a.m. After the initial formalities, Robert's attorney, Miles Crawford, opened with an aggressive offensive. Your Honor, we've recently become aware of significant assets Mrs. Taylor has deliberately concealed during these proceedings. Specifically, she has used inheritance funds, which would normally be considered separate property, to purchase the very building where my client's law firm operates, with the apparent intent to exert undue leverage in these divorce negotiations. Diane rose calmly. Your Honor, there has been no concealment whatsoever. Ms. Bennett, who never legally changed her name despite Mr. Crawford's characterization, established Bennett Development LLC as a separate business entity prior to any marital difficulties. Her purchase of Westmount Plaza was a legitimate business transaction funded entirely through her separate property inheritance. These facts would have been clearly established in the normal discovery process. Judge Moreau looked between the Kai attorneys. Mr. Crawford, are you suggesting Ms. Bennett was under some obligation to disclose this business transaction before standard discovery procedures? Your Honor, the timing and nature of the purchase clearly indicate— The timing indicates business acumen, Diane interjected. Ms. Bennett identified a valuable property opportunity and pursued it through proper channels using her separate funds. The fact that Mr. Taylor's firm happens to be a tenant in that building is coincidental, but irrelevant to these proceedings. Miles Crawford flushed slightly. Coincidental? Your Honor, Ms. Bennett has already initiated communication with the firm regarding substantial rent increases upon lease renewal. This is clearly retaliatory. If I may, Your Honor, Diane responded. Bennett Development LLC has initiated building-wide improvements affecting all tenants equally. These improvements and resulting rent adjustments are standard practice in commercial real estate and fully compliant with existing lease terms. We have documentation demonstrating that Crawford, Taylor, and Associates is receiving identical treatment to all other building tenants. Judge Moreau considered this information, then addressed me directly. Ms. Bennett, was the purchase of this property motivated by your marital difficulties? I stood, meeting her evaluative gaze steadily. No, Your Honor. I began pursuing the acquisition of Westmount Plaza approximately 10 months ago, well before I became aware of my husband's infidelity. The timing of the transaction's completion after our separation was coincidental, driven by standard commercial real estate processes. And the planned renovations and rent increases are part of the business plan I developed when evaluating the property's potential return on investment. The building requires significant updating to achieve market-appropriate rental rates. All improvements and resulting adjustments are documented in the original acquisition proposal presented to my investors. Judge Moreau nodded, then turned her attention to the other side of the courtroom. Mr. Taylor, I understand you recently sold the marital home. Could you explain your authority to do so without Ms. Bennett's signature? Robert stood, straightening his tie in what I recognized as a nervous gesture. Your Honor, I acted under a power of attorney granted to me by my wife several years ago during a period of extensive business travel on her part. The document provided broad authority regarding our joint property interests. And this power of attorney was still valid? Not limited in duration or scope? It contained no explicit expiration date, Your Honor. Judge Moreau made a note, her expression revealing nothing. Mr. Crawford, does your client acknowledge that the proceeds from this home sale constitute marital property subject to equitable distribution? Miles Crawford conferred briefly with Robert before responding. Your Honor, my client recognizes that the original purchase and renovation of the home involved marital funds. However, given Ms. Bennett's separate business activities conducted, without my client's knowledge, we believe a full accounting of all assets is necessary before determining appropriate distribution. I agree completely, Judge Moreau stated. Therefore, I am ordering comprehensive financial disclosure from both parties within 30 days, including all business entities, investments, and property interests. In the interim, neither party shall dispose of or encumber any assets that may reasonably be considered part of the marital estate. She continued with additional procedural matters, establishing temporary maintenance arrangements and scheduling subsequent hearings. Throughout the remainder of the session, I noticed Robert watching me with an intensity that suggested he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about me. As the hearing concluded and we prepared to leave, I overheard a fragment of conversation between Robert and Miles Crawford. She's not who I thought she was, Robert muttered, gathering his documents. Neither are you, apparently, Miles replied, his tone carrying clear disapproval. Outside the courthouse, Diane and I debriefed on the steps, the autumn sun providing welcome warmth against the crisp October air. That went as well as we could have hoped, Diane observed. Moreau saw through Crawford's attempt to paint you as deceptive, and Robert looked distinctly uncomfortable when questioned about the house sale. He expected me to be emotional, I replied, watching pedestrians navigate the busy street below. Angry about the house, distraught about the affair, desperate to punish him. When I didn't react that way, it unnerved him. It unnerved his attorney, too. They came prepared for a different opponent. I smiled slightly. Robert always underestimated me in subtle ways. He admired my professional capabilities but never truly understood my capacity for strategic thinking. He assumed emotional attachment would override pragmatism. Diane studied me with the perceptive gaze of an old friend. You're really not heartbroken about the house, are you? I was, I admitted. Initially. That house represented years of shared vision, countless memories, our future together as I'd imagined it. But Robert destroyed that future long before he sold the property. The house was already emptied of meaning the moment I found him with Vanessa. As we parted ways, Diane to return to her office and I to a meeting with the architects redesigning Westmount Plaza's lobby, I felt a surprising lightness. The preliminary hearing had confirmed what I already sensed. I held stronger cards than Robert realized, and his attempts to control the divorce narrative were faltering. The next phase of our legal proceedings would involve extensive financial Discovery, a process that would ultimately reveal Robert's hidden assets and fraudulent maneuvers. Petra had already compiled substantial evidence of his offshore accounts and shell companies. When fully disclosed, these would significantly strengthen my position and likely damage his professional reputation. But I took no joy in that prospect. The man I had loved for 12 years, built a home with, planned a future with, had systematically betrayed not just our marriage, but the fundamental values I thought we shared. The revelation of his financial deceptions would be necessary for a fair settlement, but would also confirm how completely I had misread his character. Later that evening, as I reviewed renovation proposals in my apartment, my phone chimed with an email notification. The sender was unexpected. Vanessa Mitchell. Subject: Meeting request. Important information. Ms. Bennett, I recognize this communication is unorthodox given the circumstances. However, I have information regarding Robert's financial activities that may be relevant to your divorce proceedings. I am willing to meet to discuss these matters at your convenience. Regards, Vanessa Mitchell. I stared at the message, analyzing its potential implications. Why would Robert's mistress reach out now? Was this a trap orchestrated by Robert to gather information or evidence he could use against me? Or had something changed in their relationship, prompting Vanessa to turn against him? After careful consideration, I forwarded the email to Diane with a brief note. Thoughts, legitimate or setup? Her response came quickly. Intriguing but suspicious. If you meet, public location, bring a witness, record everything, share nothing about our strategy. I replied to Vanessa, suggesting a meeting the following afternoon at a cafe near my office, a public space with enough ambient noise for privacy, but plenty of witnesses if needed. She confirmed within minutes, another data point suggesting this matter held urgency for her. Vanessa Mitchell arrived at Café Lumière 10 minutes early. I observed her from across the street, taking a moment to study the woman who had played such a pivotal role in dismantling my marriage. She looked younger in casual clothes, dark jeans, a forest green sweater, her red hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the polished professional veneer she maintained at the law firm, she appeared almost vulnerable as she checked her watch repeatedly and scanned passing faces. I entered precisely at our scheduled time, accompanied by Sophie, my executive assistant at Bennett Development LLC. Sophie's presence was both strategic and practical. She would serve as a witness to our conversation while also taking notes on any actionable information Vanessa might provide. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly as we approached her table. She had clearly expected me to come alone. Ms. Mitchell, I greeted her with professional courtesy, neither warm nor hostile. This is Sophie Desjardins, my executive assistant. I hope you don't mind if she joins us. Vanessa hesitated before nodding. Of course, thank you for meeting me. We settled into our seats, ordered coffees, and waited until the server departed before addressing the purpose of this unusual encounter. Your email mentioned information about Robert's financial activities, I prompted, maintaining a neutral, "Oh," Vanessa's fingers worried the napkin in her lap. Yes, I should explain first that things between Robert and me have changed significantly in recent weeks. That's really not my concern, I replied evenly. I understand, but it contextualizes why I'm here. She took a deep breath. The lakefront property in the eastern townships, the one purchased through an LLC in my name. I recently discovered I don't actually own it. My expression remained impassive, though this information aligned with Petra's findings. Go on. Robert told me he was putting the property in my name as a gesture of commitment to our future. I signed the paperwork, but I've since learned it was structured as a land trust with me as the nominal beneficiary only. Robert maintains complete control as the trustee. And you're telling me this because I've also discovered he's been using that property, and my name, to move money through a series of accounts I knew nothing about. Her voice hardened. Including funds from the sale of your house. Now we were getting to something substantive. Do you have documentation of these transactions? Vanessa withdrew a USB drive from her purse and placed it on the table. Everything I could access or copy without raising suspicion. Banking records, trust documents, emails between Robert and financial advisors I was never supposed to see. I didn't reach for the drive immediately. Why are you doing this, Ms. Mitchell? Betraying Robert's confidence doesn't align with someone supposedly in a committed relationship with him. Her laugh held no humor. Committed relationship? Robert. Never intended anything permanent with me. I was convenient and available. Once I served my purpose in his narrative of a failing marriage, his interest began to wane. And what purpose was that exactly? I was the excuse he needed. Vanessa met my gaze directly for the first time. Robert's financial manipulations began long before our relationship. He needed a justification for the divorce he already wanted, one that would generate sympathy rather than suspicion. The devoted husband reluctantly moving on after an unfortunate indiscretion presents a more favorable image than a calculated financial strategist dismantling his marriage for monetary gain. The server returned with our coffees, creating a natural pause in the conversation. When she departed, I addressed the most obvious question. If what you're saying is true, why would Robert want to end our marriage? We were financially successful. Together. Divorcing me offers no obvious economic advantage. It does when your investment partnership is facing a federal investigation, Vanessa replied quietly. I stilled. What investment partnership? Meridian Capital Partners. It's not widely known, but Robert holds a significant stake in the firm through several shell companies. They've been under SEC scrutiny for months regarding potential securities fraud. If criminal charges are filed, asset forfeiture becomes a real possibility. This was entirely new information, a dimension of Robert's financial activities that neither Petra nor Diane had uncovered. I glanced at Sophie, who was taking careful notes while maintaining an expression of professional detachment. And divorcing? Me protects these assets how, exactly? By redistributing wealth before the investigation concludes. Assets transferred in a divorce settlement aren't typically subject to later forfeiture, particularly if the receiving spouse had no knowledge of the underlying illegal activity. Vanessa gestured to the USB drive still lying between us. The documentation shows how he's been positioning resources, including the proceeds from your home sale, to appear as legitimate divorce settlements or post-marital acquisitions by an uninvolved party. I finally picked up the drive, turning it thoughtfully between my fingers. And you're providing this information out of what? A sudden attack of conscience? Vanessa's expression hardened. Self-preservation. I recently learned my name is attached to documents I never knowingly signed. Documents that could implicate me in financial fraud I had no part in. When federal investigators start unraveling these transactions, I don't intend to be Robert's convenient scapegoat. Her motivation made sense. Self-interest rather than moral awakening. That made her information more credible, not less. "Have you spoken with federal authorities?" I asked. "Not yet. I wanted to understand the full scope first, and I thought—" She hesitated. "I thought you deserved to know what you're actually dealing with. This isn't just about adultery or hidden divorce assets. Robert's playing a much deeper game." I nodded, acknowledging the unexpected courtesy in her actions without expressing gratitude. "I'll have this information reviewed by my legal team. If it proves valuable in my proceedings, I'm willing to provide a formal statement regarding your cooperation and limited involvement in these matters." Relief flickered across her face. "That would be appreciated." As we concluded our meeting, Vanessa offered one final piece of information, an insight into Robert that explained much about his recent behavior. "He's desperate to access capital. Right now. The Meridian investigation has frozen much of his liquidity. That's why he sold your house so quickly and at below market value. He needed immediate cash that wouldn't be tied to the investment accounts under scrutiny." This aligned with the financial pressure we'd already identified, but contextualized it within a much more serious framework. If Robert was indeed entangled in securities fraud, our divorce wasn't just a matter of dividing assets. It was part of a complex strategy to shield wealth from federal prosecution. After Vanessa departed, Sophie and I remained at the cafe to discuss implications. "If this information is legitimate," Sophie observed, "it changes everything about your divorce strategy." "Yes," I agreed, "and potentially gives us significantly more leverage. Robert's not just hiding assets from me, he's hiding them from federal investigators. That creates vulnerability we can exploit." I contacted Diane immediately, arranging to deliver the USB drive for review by her team in Petra. Then I called an emergency meeting with my financial advisors to evaluate my own potential exposure. If Robert had engaged in securities fraud, I needed absolute certainty that none of my business interests could be tainted by association. Over the next week, the information Vanessa provided was meticulously verified and expanded upon. Petra confirmed Robert's connection to Meridian Capital Partners through a labyrinthine ownership structure designed to obscure his involvement. Diane's investigative team uncovered communications between Robert and Meridian's principals, discussing strategies to address regulatory concerns. Exchanges that stopped just short of explicitly acknowledging wrongdoing, but clearly indicated awareness of problematic practices. Most significantly, the documentation revealed Robert's comprehensive plan to shield assets through our divorce, a strategy initiated nearly 2 years earlier when he likely first became aware of potential regulatory issues at Meridian. Armed with this knowledge, Diane proposed a bold approach to our next court appearance. "We don't reveal everything," she advised during our strategy session. "Just enough to demonstrate to Robert that continuing this fight is more dangerous to him than settling generously." "A settlement keeps this quieter than litigation," I noted, understanding the leverage we now possessed. "If we push for a full court battle with financial disclosure, his connection to Meridian becomes part of the public record." "Exactly. And that accelerates the timeline of any federal investigation. Robert needs this divorce resolved quickly, and quietly now more than ever." We structured our settlement proposal carefully, comprehensive enough to be fair, but strategically designed to protect my interests while offering Robert the discretion he desperately needed. We would address the fraudulent transfer and sale of the house not by demanding the full proceeds, but by structuring compensation through other assets. We would acknowledge Bennett Development LLC as separate property while proposing a reasonable, one-time payment to address any potential marital interest. Most importantly, We would include a confidentiality clause that prevented either party from voluntarily disclosing the other's financial information except as required by law. This last provision was crucial. It gave Robert hope of containing information about Meridian while preserving my legal obligation to cooperate with any federal investigation that might later emerge. 2 days before our scheduled settlement conference, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Gerald Crawford, looking considerably less commanding than during our previous encounter, requested a brief meeting. Professional courtesy suggested I accept, though I ensured Sophie remained present throughout our conversation. "I'll be direct, Claire," Gerald began after declining my offer of coffee. "Robert's position has evolved regarding your divorce settlement." "Has it?" I maintained the cool, professional demeanor that had proven so effective throughout these proceedings. "He's prepared to be significantly more accommodating than his previous offers indicated. In fact, he's authorized me to communicate that he'll accept a 65-35 distribution in your favor regarding all marital assets." This was a substantial shift from Robert's initial position, but still didn't account for the assets he had hidden or the leverage we now possessed regarding Meridian. "That's an interesting starting point," I replied neutrally. "However, our settlement proposal will be presented through proper channels at tomorrow's conference." Gerald leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically earnest. "Claire, I've known you for many years. You've always been reasonable, practical. Whatever you may have learned recently about certain business matters, pushing too hard could have consequences beyond your divorce." The implied threat was clear, but ultimately revealing. Gerald wouldn't be here, attempting this awkward intervention, if Robert wasn't genuinely alarmed by the prospect of our settlement conference. "I appreciate your concern, Gerald. I'm simply seeking a fair resolution that recognizes all aspects of our marital enterprise, including those that may not appear in standard financial disclosures." Gerald's expression tightened. "Some matters are better left unexplored for everyone's benefit." "Perhaps, but that determination isn't yours to make." I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "I'll see you at the settlement conference tomorrow." After Gerald departed, Sophie raised an eyebrow. "They're worried." "Terrified," I corrected, "and that confirms we're on the right track." The settlement conference began at 9 a.m. in a private conference room at the courthouse. Judge Moreau presided, with each party accompanied by their respective legal teams. Robert appeared composed but couldn't fully conceal the tension evident in his tightly clasped hands and the muscle occasionally twitching along his jawline. Diane presented our settlement proposal with professional precision, detailing the distribution of known marital assets, addressing the proceeds from the house sale, and establishing clear boundaries regarding Bennett Development LLC. Then, with careful wording that avoided direct accusations, she addressed the recently discovered financial interests that required consideration. "My client recognizes that certain investment partnerships and associated entities may face regulatory challenges in the near future," Diane stated, her gaze steady on Robert's increasingly pale face. "Our proposal includes provisions that respect the complex nature of these interests while ensuring equitable distribution of all marital assets, regardless of how they may be currently titled or structured." Miles Crawford requested a brief recess almost immediately. Granted 30 minutes, Robert and his team retreated to a separate conference room for intense discussion we could hear, but not distinguish through the walls. When they returned, Robert had visibly aged. The confident, commanding presence that had dominated our marriage had diminished, replaced by a man confronting the potential collapse of carefully constructed facades. "We are prepared to accept the proposed settlement with minor modifications," Miles announced, his tone professionally neutral despite the clear tension in the room. Those modifications proved reasonably acceptable, adjustments to payment timelines rather than substantial changes to the distribution itself. Within 3 hours, we had negotiated a comprehensive settlement agreement that would end our marriage and resolve our financial entanglement permanently. As the document was being finalized for signatures, Robert approached me during a brief break. It was our first direct conversation in nearly 4 months. "You knew," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "About Meridian. About everything." I met his gaze evenly. "I know enough." "Are you going to the SEC?" "I'm not volunteering information to anyone, Robert, but I won't lie if directly questioned by authorities." He nodded, accepting this as the most he could reasonably expect. "The building, Westmount Plaza. That was brilliantly played." "It wasn't a play. It was a business decision that happened to intersect with our personal circumstances." "No," he disagreed with a hint of his former confidence. "It was strategic brilliance. I taught you well." The presumption in his statement, that my capabilities somehow derived from his influence rather than my own intelligence and determination, crystallized everything I had come to understand about our marriage. Robert had never truly seen me as an equal partner, but as an extension of himself, a reflection of his own excellence. "You taught me nothing I couldn't have learned elsewhere, Robert," I replied calmly, "but you showed me everything about who you really are. For that instructive demonstration, I suppose I should thank you." Before he could respond, Diane signaled that the documents were ready for our signatures. We returned to the conference table, where Judge Moreau oversaw the formal execution of our settlement agreement. With each signature, 13 years of shared history, the love, the betrayal, the illusions, were systematically dismantled and reconstructed into a legal framework that would define our relationship moving forward. When the final document was signed, there was no dramatic moment of closure, no emotional catharsis, simply the quiet shuffling of papers as copies were distributed, brief handshakes between attorneys, and Judge Moreau's matter-of-fact confirmation that our marriage was legally dissolved. Robert departed immediately, surrounded by his legal team. I remained behind briefly with Diane to review next steps regarding implementation of the settlement terms. "You did it," Diane said as we gathered our materials. 12 months ago, if someone had described how this would unfold, would you have believed them? I considered the question seriously. The betrayal? Perhaps. I'd sensed something changing in our relationship, though I couldn't have named it. The financial deceptions? Never. I believed completely in Robert's integrity. And yet when confronted with its absence, you outmaneuvered him at every turn. Because I finally saw clearly, I explained. Not just Robert, but myself. What I'm capable of when not defining my worth through his perception. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright autumn sunshine, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not happiness exactly, but the settled certainty of having navigated an impossible situation with dignity and strategic intelligence. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, the federal investigation into Meridian Capital Partners became public knowledge. Robert, while not named in the initial indictments, was identified as a person of interest in ongoing investigations. His partnership at the firm was quietly dissolved, his professional reputation irreparably damaged. Crawford, Taylor & Associates chose not to renew their lease at Westmount Plaza when the term expired. I didn't raise their rent beyond the originally proposed 28% increase. The building improvements justified that adjustment, and business considerations outweighed any personal satisfaction I might have derived from further financial pressure. Bennett Development LLC thrived, expanding to acquire 3 additional commercial properties in Montreal's most desirable business districts. My reputation as a shrewd but ethical developer grew, attracting investors eager to participate in my carefully selected projects. I never moved back into residential real estate. The emotional attachment to physical spaces had been permanently altered by watching Robert sell our home with such calculated indifference. I maintained my apartment overlooking the St. Lawrence River, finding unexpected contentment in its sleek contemporary design and absence of shared history. A year after our divorce, I received a letter from Vanessa Mitchell, postmarked from Vancouver. She had relocated to British Columbia, started a new career in corporate compliance, and wanted to express her appreciation for my measured approach to her involvement in Robert's schemes. The formal statement I'd provided to federal investigators had indeed helped establish her limited knowledge and culpability. While our connection began in the worst possible way, she wrote, I've come to respect the dignity and strategic intelligence with which you handled an impossible situation. In rebuilding my life away from Robert's influence, I often find myself asking, what would Claire Bennett do? It's been a surprisingly effective guiding principle. The letter made me smile, not from vindication but from recognition of how completely circumstances can transform our understanding of ourselves and others. Neither Vanessa nor I were the women we had been 2 years earlier. Robert's betrayal had catalyzed profound change in both our lives, though in radically different directions. 18 months after our divorce, I was invited to speak at a women's business leadership conference about commercial real estate development. During the networking reception afterward, I met Michael Laurier, an urban planning consultant with an infectious enthusiasm for sustainable city design. Our conversation about repurposing historic industrial spaces continued through dinner and evolved into a collaborative project integrating his planning expertise with my development experience. Our professional relationship gradually expanded to include personal dimensions, theater performances, hiking excursions in the Laurentians, quiet dinners where conversation flowed effortlessly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.